This is a problem-solving project for the class Leadership and Diversity. Before we get started, I would like to introduce the team members. My name is Moses, then we have Sandy, Kimberly, and Carole. So let's get started. William Booth embarked upon his ministerial career in 1852, desiring to win the lost multitudes of England to Christ. He walked the streets of London to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ to the poor, the homeless, the hungry, and the destitute. Thieves, prostitutes, gamblers, and drunkards were among Booth's first converts to Christianity. In 1867, Booth had only 10 full-time workers, but by 1874, that number had grown to 1,000 volunteers and 42 evangelists, all serving under the name The Christian Mission. The story goes that Booth was reading a printer's proof of the 1878 annual report when he noticed the statement, "The Christian Mission is a volunteer army." Crossing out the words volunteer army, he penned in Salvation Army. Those words birthed the organization we know of today as the Salvation Army. The Salvation Army expanded rapidly. It went into Canada, Australia, France, Switzerland, South Africa, India, and your local neighborhoods. Today, the Salvation Army is active in virtually every corner of the world. The Salvation Army is part of the Universal Christian Church. Its message is based on the Bible. Its mission is to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ and meet human needs in His name without discrimination. In keeping with this mission, the Veterans and Family Center was established in 2011. The Veterans and Family Center is a place of transition that honors veterans. Through collaboration with the Veterans Administration, clients are provided with the tools necessary to become self-sufficient. The Salvation Army, with the help of various partners, has been meeting human needs for over 100 years. In order to continue this mission well into the future, the organization needs to understand the things that it does particularly well and those things it does not so well. The company needs to recognize the factors that in the future may provide potential growth or factors that may cause stagnation, even decline. As we go forward in an effort to identify the needs and challenges the Salvation Army faces, Sandy will provide a summary of the organization's overall strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Next, Kimberly will discuss specifically the need, problem, or challenge faced by the organization and how it's affecting or will affect the overall mission of the Salvation Army. And lastly, Carole will identify possible solutions and the benefits and drawbacks of each solution. Carole will follow with the recommended solution and steps needed for implementation. Now I am going to turn it over to Sandy, who will provide a summary of the SWOT analysis.
The Salvation Army is one of the most trusted names in charitable giving worldwide. The fact that they remain so among controversy within other nonprofits helps give them an advantage. The Salvation Army maintains a simple mission to help others. This mission is accomplished in many ways, such as through rehab centers, thrift shops, child and adult daycare centers, group homes, medical facilities, and disaster relief efforts. Some weaknesses in the organization could be their large size, leading to bureaucracy. Such a large organization also needs a large amount of funding to keep their many programs up and running. 8% of the Salvation Army's funds come from government contracts, whose regulations can prove difficult to adhere to at times. Finally, low-paid staff can lead to less dedicated employees, which can interfere with their main mission to help others. The Salvation Army has an opportunity to spread the word regarding all the programs they offer in order to gain more donations. In 2014, the use of social media in its Red Kettle Regions campaign saw a 22% total increase in donations. This campaign encouraged others to share the reason they give to the Salvation Army. Continued use of social media is a huge opportunity to increase funds for the organization. In addition to the funds, the Salvation Army is always in need of more volunteers to serve in its myriad of programs. Finally, the changing dynamics of those whom the Salvation Army serves could create future opportunities to change up programs to better serve those in need. One example is the changing age of veterans that the Salvation Army serves. Increasingly younger vets are coming to be served along with their families, which could create further need in this changing population. The earlier mentioned lack of funding could lead to program cutbacks that will hurt the program's recipients in the end. Certain policies and procedures can add to more bureaucracy, leading to frustrated staff, volunteers, and recipients. A general slowdown in the economy can also hurt funding when people have less money to spend on charitable giving. A final possible threat is the pressure to maintain their reputation as a trustworthy organization. With many other nonprofits facing scrutiny due to scandals and misappropriation of funds, the Salvation Army needs to keep their donors assured that their charitable gifts are in good hands.
Thank you for that introduction. My name is Kimberly, and what my role here is in this presentation is really taking that SWOT analysis that Sandy did and that introduction that Moses gave us and kind of condensing that down into an identification of the concern that we are going to address in the Salvation Army organization. So after looking at our options and doing a research regarding the Salvation Army and getting input from Moses, who actually works in the Salvation Army, and so he has that insight, we decided to identify the concern that we're talking about as a lack of funding and how that contributes to a lack of adequate staffing. And then going from that and flowing into how that undermines the mission of service and outreach within the Salvation Army. So stepping directly into the issue of funding for the Salvation Army, there are 4 primary sources of funding. It's important to note again that the Salvation Army is a nonprofit, and so a lot of their funding comes from various places, one of which is charitable giving. When we talk about charitable giving, there's lots of different ways that this can happen, but just for context of something that's really familiar, these are most commonly the charitable giving is done through the bell ringers with the red buckets during the holiday season. Approximately 80% of the funding that the Salvation Army receives and works on is all donated during that red bucket drive during the holiday season. The second source of income that we would address when we're talking about the Salvation Army are funds from the United Way. The United Way primarily works in humanitarian relief, and they also contribute to the vision of Salvation Army. We also find that there is private funding through foundations that support the mission and the outreach of the Salvation Army, and then of course government funding that has a lot to do with the controversy surrounding the mission and the outreach, again, that the Salvation Army is doing. So the reason that funding comes into such a concern with nonprofits are because when you have a nonprofit, they work off the status that there are many people who observe and who are held accountable for the work of a nonprofit. The Salvation Army in particular has, like we talked about, those 4 sources of funding, one of which being the government gives and contributes to the work of the Salvation Army, which that's an entirely different type of controversy. But here it means that they're going to want to have a bigger say, a deeper impact, and better accountability for the funds that the Salvation Army not only has, but in the way that they also use them. This is not just true of Salvation Army, but of all nonprofits. They're under the heavy scrutiny, and their funds must be handled above reproach. So they don't always get to decide that this amount of money goes to this person or to this particular outreach. Rather, they have this list of demands that must be met according to the income that they do receive. And so they can only put so much toward funding, such as staff. So moving that conversation from a lack of funding and how that creates a secondary impact on staffing, we see that the Salvation Army is under scrutiny because of their religious affiliation, but also because there's a serious lack of accountability in the staff that they do have, because there's not enough funds to retain the type of employees that it takes to run such a giant organization as is the vision of Salvation Army. The staff with Salvation Army is overworked and quite often undereducated. And that is primarily because those who are most educated are going to be able to garner the wages that are higher than what the Salvation Army can offer. So then they don't have quite as big of a pool of people who are formally educated to the point that's necessary to run the type of outreaches that the Salvation Army has outlined as being very important to them. It also means that there's inadequate support for those outreaches, and the people who are working for them are so overworked that they're stressed and they're making poor decisions. As we've discussed in this class, stress affects our lives in a multitude of ways, but when you're working in that environment full time, the way that can come out is really in a lot of dangerous outcomes, as far as the people who are staffing making really inappropriate decisions, or just decisions made in that mind frame of stress, and how that affects the outreach then that they are having. We've already talked a little bit about how the allocation of funds says that they cannot put more toward recruitment, more toward keeping that staff on that is formally educated, or that has the adequate amount of service in that particular area. So then we're going to need to look at, okay, what now? Now that we've identified, A, who are we talking about, the Salvation Army? B, what is the analysis of that organization? And we've identified what our concern is, that we're looking at a lack of funding, and how that translates into a lack of staffing. And now we need to look at, okay, now what? And it's at this point that I'd like to hand it over to Carole, and she's going to talk about some of the ways that we've come up with to resolve, or at least alleviate, some of these issues. Carole?
Thank you. As Kim said, the Salvation Army is caught in this constant struggle to provide funding for its programs, and this directly affects its ability to afford quality staff. So how can the Salvation Army address this concern? Well, there are several possible solutions. First of all, they could find new sources of funding and or redouble their already existing fundraising efforts. Another possible solution is for the Salvation Army to merge with another nonprofit that provides the same type of services. This way they could pool their resources. Then there's always room for improving staff morale. They could take certain steps in that direction. Now, let's look at some sources for funding. First of all, fundraising. In today's market, technology is king. Organizations need to take advantage of the opportunities that the internet and mobile technology provide. Organizations need a strong presence on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, for example. Users appreciate interactive elements like clickables and short videos that help them engage with the material on websites. And speaking of interactive elements, donate buttons are important. A donate button should be prominent on the website. A user should not have to search all over to find it. And once the donate button is clicked, the procedures for donating should be easy to follow. Older methods of fundraising should not be abandoned just yet, like the direct mail and phone-a-thons. Although the population is moving away from paper mail and landlines, a significant number of people still interact with their communities this way. And this is the best way to reach those people. And though it does take a huge investment in time and resources, it does provide a surprisingly significant return on that investment. Another source of funding would be to require participants to contribute to program costs. A program in Australia accommodates clients who can't pay, but after they are settled, they are required to establish an income so they can contribute. The client contribution doesn't cover the program's costs, but it helps. The obvious advantage here is the help the contribution provides towards defraying the program's costs. The con rests on whether the client can pay. What if they can't establish an income? What if the Salvation Army was to merge with another organization that provides similar services? A merger is an integration or combining of two or more separate organizations into one legal entity. The advantage here would be that they could preserve the mission, they could improve existing services, and even expand the services. They could pool their resources, their donor base. They could pool their volunteer resources. They could even combine employees and have a larger staff with which to serve their clients. A key element to attracting and retaining high-quality employees is staff morale. You've got to keep your people happy. One of the ways organizations can do this is through their benefits package. Good insurance policies, for example, lets the employee know the company cares about her well-being, as does a generous vacation and personal leave policy. Can I have time off when I need it? Organizations that retain workers show their appreciation by providing bonuses, for example, maybe for reaching goals or longevity. This shows the employee that they are valued. Good training is important. It's an investment. Employees need to understand the mission and what procedures are. They need to understand resources that are available to them. It's frustrating to only receive minimum training and be reprimanded because you didn't understand what was required. And a collaborative environment is very important. Employees and leaders need to be on the same page. In order to do this, leaders need to seek feedback from their employees. They need to find out what's working, what isn't working, what can they do to make the workplace a better environment. There needs to be open dialogue between leaders and their employees. Now to wrap things up. Moses gave us an overview of the Salvation Army and its programs. The Salvation Army's message is based on the Bible. Its ministry is motivated by the love of God. Its mission is to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ and to meet human needs in His name without discrimination. Sandy provided a SWOT analysis which pinpointed lack of funding as one of the Salvation Army's challenges. Then Kim discussed how inadequate funds not only creates an inability to serve the community, but also impacts adequate staffing. So then I showed how there are several things the Salvation Army can do to increase funds and retain quality staffing. Thank you.